Well, I'd just like to extend my welcome also from the local tribe, although just a recent addition. You can see why we live and work here, and I hope you have a great few days. So we might just pop the slides up, thanks. So let's talk about tribes, because I think we do actually work in a tribal jungle in healthcare. Think about it for a minute, all the different professions, specialties, departments. We all have our own subtle tribal culture, language, and even tribal dress. And perhaps this is an inevitable consequence of the complexity of our healthcare today. But I think for me, it means that my toughest days at work are not always the ones that people think. It's actually not the technical challenge of the high-octane trauma scenario. It's actually not the confronting end-of-life discussions. It's not even when I make a mistake. I mean, these things are tough, but they're the things we've trained for. And I'd like to think that after 20 years, that's the kind of thing I can do a half-decent job of. No, my toughest days at work are when the dark side of tribalism comes out. And when there's an intern in tears who's been yelled at for not ordering the serum rhubarb that's so important to the medical registrar tribe, or when there's doctors and nurses who are too special to say please or thank you, and when the junior doctors are trying to sell their patients to different tribes using the correct tribal language. And look, even my own colleagues talking about the idiot inpatient registrars. I mean, this is the dark side of tribalism in healthcare. And yet I know our tribalism has a good side. I put on my black scrubs and go to work and I feel like I belong to someone. The bonds I have with the ED doctors and nurses make me do a better job each day. I mean, my tribe is great. They do exceptional things and they help lift me to do more than I think I can. My tribe is great and I really like it when junior doctors want to join us for all the good things that I see about us. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you just to reflect for a minute and think about your tribe, however you define that. And maybe just think to yourself about one good and one not so good thing about your tribe. And then let's have a little meeting of the tribe, shall we? I'd like you to talk to someone next to you, introduce yourself and share maybe a couple of those tribal characteristics. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Okay, we might close up that conversation.
To start.
Okay. Lowercase.
And hope you keep it going for the next 3 days. So, with tribalism in mind, I'd like to share a case study with you. And this is a story about me, and it's a story that I used to tell with pride, but not so much now. And to give you the background, it was 4:30 one afternoon. I'd just received the evening shift handover. And one of the patients who I'd been handed over was an elderly lady who was going to the operating theatre. And she'd been in a motor vehicle accident and she had a few injuries, but one was a vascular injury. And the vascular registrar was sitting at the desk, having seen the patient, writing his notes. So not long after this, I get a phone call from radiology to say that lady's also got an unstable cervical spine fracture. And I think, well, that's fine. She's still had her hard collar on. But clearly this is information that I need to share with the treating team. So I'm going to role play this and I'm going to play both myself and the vascular registrar. So we'll see how this goes. But I do want you to watch it with an idea about healthcare tribalism.
Which button?
Yours too.
Hi, I'm Victoria. Have you got a minute? Yep. Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm the emergency consultant and I need to speak to you about Mrs. Jones. Yes. Well, this is not going well, and you can just imagine the rising anger at this disrespect that's being shown. And of course, by now there's an intern and a couple of nurses who are watching this, and tribal pride is on the line here. Now, I'd like to tell you this ended well, but this is what I actually did. Mate, this is the bit where you say, "Hello, my name is, how can I help you?" or "Do you need to go back to kindergarten?" Yeah, I used to tell that with pride. And look, I did have a point. Some of you might follow Dr. Kate Granger on Twitter. And as you might know, she's a doctor who is also suffering from breast cancer. And her experience of not having healthcare professionals introduce themselves led her to start something of a crusade to say, hello, my name is. And I'd like to think that if we need to show our patients that respect, then surely we should be showing that to our colleagues as well. But let's get back to this story. As I said, I used to tell it with pride, but actually this is yet another subtle side of the dark side. Because in fact, I've long since forgotten what happened to that patient, if I ever knew, or the vascular registrar. But boy, have I told that story in the tea room a few times. And what am I actually doing when I'm doing that is I'm bonding my tribe against the enemy, idiot, inpatient registrars. And in fact, more malevolently, probably what I'm doing is elevating my own position in the tribe while I try and boast about how I can be just as nasty and insulting as the best in my tribe when it comes to those idiot inpatient registrars. So the dark side is actually more subtle than we think. In a similar vein, the management of upper GI hemorrhage was studied at our institution a few years ago. And this was studied in the context of the patient journey and looking at the different treating groups involved in that patient journey: ED, medicine, gastroenterology, endoscopy nurses. And the researchers did interviews with many people involved, as well as looked at notes. And they had many interesting findings, of course, but conflict came up a lot. Now, I'm going to show you a quotation from one of the emergency specialists who described how she or he, the de-identified emergency consultant, felt about managing conflict in this context. There I was again, building my team based on the common enemy. And in fact, this is well described, not just in healthcare. If anyone's read the book by David Logan, Tribal Leadership, he describes 5 levels at which groups or teams or organisations operate. And not surprisingly, the first 3 levels really are very dysfunctional teams, and we've probably all been part of those as well. Level 4, and that's the kind of thing that I was doing in these cases, is actually quite a functional team. This team works together, they feel good about each other. But the way they have built that team is through having common enemies and through putting other people down. It's a classic, charismatic, narcissist approach. So the dark side is indeed subtle, but I want to bring it back to patient care, because one of the things that is very important to our tribe is time. And this is, you can see it in our language, the down time in cardiac arrest, the golden hour in trauma, if you believe that anymore, the 4-hour rule, waiting times in emergency. And look, some of this is for good reason. This patient having a STEMI is more likely to live if we get into cath lab faster. This septic patient is more likely to live if we administer her antibiotics sooner. So let's consider another case study with that in mind. And Amy is an ED registrar working in an emergency department, not far from here, where there is no upstairs cath lab. And Amy and her consultant have been looking after a 62-year-old lady who presented with some very vague posterior left shoulder pain. In fact, she'd had this pain for 24 hours. It was probably worse the day before, but she'd made it to ED now. And the triage staff were right onto it, brought her into acute and did an ECG. Now, the patient did look good. Her heart rate was fine, blood pressure was fine. Her pain actually was not that great. But Amy and her consultant say, look, clearly this is an acute coronary syndrome. She needs to go up the road to the Silver Sands University Hospital. So get on the phone to the interventional cardiologist and transfer up there. She needs a cath now. So Amy does this, and she goes off and she has a chat with the interventional cardiologist. And she comes back and she says to the emergency consultant, yes, they agree with our interpretation of the ECG, but they'd like it if we could just keep her here until there's a bed ready. They'll probably be able to cath her tomorrow. Oh, and already I can feel in the room everyone's outraged. Our version of right is that she needs to get to a cath lab now. So again, I want you to think just to yourselves this time, if Amy was there in front of you and you were trying to control your emotions, what advice would you give to Amy? Just think about it for a few seconds. And I'm guessing you came up with a few tried and true. First of all, you said, well, Amy, did you do a nice S-bar? And this is fantastic, beautiful, structured communication. Not much good if you've got someone who isn't listening. Then you probably suggested, look, Amy, try and get a bit of rapport with this guy. Ask him how his family is. Have you got anything else in common? Maybe ask him how his contract negotiation is going with Queensland Health. And then, if that didn't work, you'd probably lift it up a level. And you'd start saying things like, well, tell him your consultant said. And of course, then if that didn't work, we've always got that little trump card in our back pocket, haven't we? We pull it out and we go, we just want what's best for the patient, in brackets, and you don't. So these are classic negotiating strategies. So let's ponder for a minute about negotiation. And I guess we're talking in this context about negotiation at the hot zone. There's a few facts, and it's not just in our world, but basically there is always more than one version of right. We actually don't know what the other priorities were for the cath lab. In fact, just pushing your right even harder at the person you're negotiating with is blatantly ridiculous. If you ever go into a schoolyard, you see that. It's is, isn't, is, isn't, is, isn't. We've got to get a little more sophisticated than that. And even if we do win, maybe we lose in the long run. So while we're deconstructing about negotiation, let's think about it, because again, in any negotiation, we're sort of trying to trade off the goal we're achieving with the relationship of the person we're negotiating with. And so if it's a low importance goal and a not very important relationship, you're going to avoid it. You get shortchanged 5 cents at the 7-Eleven. Any sane person is not going to pick that fight. Similarly, if the goal is something like having drinks with your mates, and then your partner reminds you that it's little Johnny's school concert tonight, you are going to give in. In fact, you're going to give in with a smile. In healthcare, we think that we're mostly here, that the patient goal is everything, and our relationship with the person is not that important. That was the interaction that we had here. And yet I'd like to suggest that actually in healthcare, pretty much all our negotiations are here. Because whatever happens with this patient, we have the future patients that we need to think about. And so building our relationships becomes almost as important as that goal. So the kind of tactics that we thought we might give Amy are well described in business literature and elsewhere. But there's one I think that maybe we couldn't give advice to Amy about, which I think is pretty important. And that is simply pulling up a chair. Because when we sit down and we talk to people, it changes the dynamic. In fact, our patients tell us this. They tell us that they perceive that we've spent more time with them. They perceive that now we understand where they're coming from. And it's just the same when we're having a negotiation. And what's more, it's not just a perception. We are more likely to listen if we sit down. So next time when we're feeling like we want to put our hands on our hips, just think about pulling up a chair and maybe trying to take the heat out of the negotiation. But can we do more? And I guess when it comes down to it, we can only do so much at 2 o'clock in the morning when we're having that fight, no matter how sophisticated our negotiation. And I'd suggest there's some things we need to do to build those relationships in the long term. We need to take every opportunity we can to build those bonds. Go around to radiology and say, hello, my name is Victoria, I'm on shift tonight, and don't have a form with you the first time. Just try and be human about the interactions that we have at work every day. I guess many people are already doing this, but look for opportunities in research, in education, in advocacy. These are obvious opportunities for us to build across tribes, across professions, across departments, across specialties, because then we can build those relationships away from the hot zone of the patient and actually have people that we trust and know and who can help us when the negotiation is important. We did a little bit of this, and I spoke about this last year at SMAC when we tried to improve our times for our patients getting to cath lab with STEMIs. And as you can see from this photo, this is a tribal melting pot. There are people from all professions and specialties and disciplines here. And actually, to each of those people, the reason we're not getting to cath lab faster looks really simple. The trouble is, it's kind of different for each group. And so for us to actually get our patient to this cath lab in a timely way, we need to actually find ways, like simulation, like education, where we can bring people together to actually talk about what's important to them. And when we actually simulated this patient journey, that's what we did. And this is what our participants told us about the experience of simulating the patient journey. Building the relationships. And you know what? When we actually built our relationships, we also achieved our goal. We halved the time that our patients were taking to get to cath lab as a result of some of that bonding that we did. So the goal and the relationship don't have to be in tension. And the same when we do things like trauma team training. Of course we're training the operational stuff, of course we're training the process stuff, but don't neglect and make explicit this is an opportunity for us to join together as tribes. The second thing I think we need to do is actually walk the walk with our juniors. We need to be able to say to them, the other tribes are great. We need to lift ourselves up to level 5, because what do level 5 teams do? We can make our tribes in competition with what's possible. And every now and again, when we go to war, because sometimes we have to, just make sure we're balancing up the risks to the goals and to the relationships. So yesterday I was asked in the education workshop about what you do when you want to change someone's worldview. Hello, my name is Victoria. My tribe is great, and so is yours. Thank you, and have a fantastic smaccGOLD.
Thank you very much, Victoria. We've got some questions which are very interesting, but before I do, the Wi-Fi is very good. The name is smaccGOLD, and so is the password, if you want to join in with a Twitter question. And we have 2.
Yeah, so there was a bit of concern on Twitter that Min Lakong might have died because he hadn't tweeted for 5 minutes, but he has not died. And he has got the first question in. So Victoria, he wanted to know how you felt about the concept of training as you're going to fight with your ideas about not always needing to win.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's probably, maybe that tweet was before the end bit, but I don't think we need to stop fighting. It's about having the right goal, and it shouldn't be each other. It does actually need to be the patient outcome. And I think sometimes we delude ourselves, that's what we're fighting for, whereas sometimes the dark side is actually creeping in.
Egos? Surely not.
And then we had another question from Dino Druder, who wanted to know, where does it go wrong and how should we change? Because we start medical school usually as the same new-faced, keen person. Where does it go wrong for us? How can we change that?
You're right, and actually we've been doing a little bit of work at my institution about identity of medical students and how it gets formed. And it starts very early, and in fact in a lot of cases it even starts because family expectations of what a doctor is and what kind of doctor they would be. So it's multiple influences, but I think it's just about us trying to catch ourselves when we're about to just make that derisory comment. I mean, no one minds a little bit of playful stuff, and we often make jokes about our own professions, and that's fine, but I think it's very easy to slip in terms of insult to others, and people pick up on that, and especially juniors.
Fabulous.